Hey guys, Coach 2K back with another NBA 2K MyLeague series video as we are working on our fictional MyLeague. This episode we're going to talk about the salary cap table and the situation in particular with the Hoosier Hobgoblins, so we can kind of start figuring out how we want to approach our personnel and contracts and all that kind of stuff. So if you're new to the channel, click that subscribe button. Click the bell to get notified whenever I upload anything new so you don't miss a single episode or any other NBA 2K video that I might put out. Alright, so let's get started. So if you're like me and you've not played a lot of MyLeague or paid a lot of attention to how contracts work in the NBA, you may not be quite familiar with how, all that stuff works. So I thought it might make a lot of sense, since this stuff is fairly new to me too, to kind of go through the salary cap table and kind of just do some salary cap 101, so you can kind of understand, if you're running a MyLeague or my GM, how that's going to work for you. Okay, so when we're looking at our team's financial situation and contracts and all that, the first thing that we want to know is what is the salary cap. So the salary cap for this current season, in this file, I can hit the triangle button, and when I do that, up in the upper left hand corner, it tells me what the salary cap is, and it's $101.87 million for the current year. So there are two types of salary caps. There's a hard cap and there's a soft cap. Now what the difference between the two is, a hard cap means that if this $101.87 million was a hard cap, then all my salaries total could not exceed $101.87 million. A soft cap means that I can go over the salary cap in certain situations. And so I could spend more than 101.87 in the NBA because this is a soft cap situation. Okay, so let's do a simple example here. Let's say that for the current season, I take all the salaries that I'm already obligated to pay to all my players, and I added them all up, and they totaled $101.87 million, and that's exactly equal to the salary cap. And let's say that for whatever reason I wanted to sign a new player. Well, that would be money that I'd have to spend over the salary cap, and I'm not allowed to do that except in certain situations, and those are called exceptions to the cap, and that's how teams end up spending more than the salary cap. But if it's not an exception to the cap rule, then I wouldn't be able to sign that player to the team. Now, the collective bargaining agreement is an extremely complicated contract. It governs all the NBA contracts, establishes the salary cap and all those rules. NBA 2K does the best it can to translate those rules into the game. So in real life, you can go over the salary cap, and you can also go over the salary cap in NBA 2K, as long as it's one of the exceptions that allow you to spend above the salary cap. And on the salary cap screen, these are the exceptions. Things like, bird rights, early bird rights, non-bird exception. You get a rookie exception to sign your first round draft picks. You get a mid-level exception per season. You may always sign a player to a minimum contract, and players signed to the veteran minimum have a cap hit lower than their salary. So I'm not going to go into the rules specifically for these exceptions, but just realize that if you were at the cap and you were right at it and you wanted to exceed the cap, these are the times that you can do it. Okay, so that pretty much establishes the salary cap and the fact that you can spend more than the salary cap in the NBA because it's a soft cap, and the times that you can go over the cap in general. Now, just because you can go over the cap doesn't mean that you can go over the cap, and spend as much as you want. So in NBA 2K, you actually have a hard cap. I think the first season here that I set up my file is I couldn't spend more than $190 million on salaries. I think you could even set that up to be like 240 million. So within the game, there is actually a hard cap that you can't exceed with player salaries. And when you first start the file, that's 190 million. Now in real life, they don't have a hard cap. I don't think. They don't have a hard cap. And instead what they do is they establish something called a luxury tax threshold. In this current season, the luxury tax threshold is $123.73 million. And what this means is that, yeah, I might be able to go over the cap and pay as much salary as I want as long as I'm following the rules over on the salary cap side. But once I exceed $123.73 million in total payroll, well then I'm going to have to pay a penalty for doing that. And that's called a luxury tax. Now, certain teams don't mind paying luxury tax because they got plenty of money to spend. Other teams that don't make as much revenue, they don't want to pay the luxury tax. So the teams that spend more money and pay the tax, some of that money is given to the other teams that stay below and don't pay the luxury tax in real life. So that's kind of a form of revenue sharing that kind of takes the tax and gives some of it to the teams that are staying under the luxury tax threshold. So while the NBA doesn't have a hard cap, it does make it more and more expensive to sign players the higher you go over the luxury tax. And so it starts to make you think, do I really want to pay that much for that person's contract? Because every contract over the luxury tax is more expensive than it normally would be. And so that's the idea, is to kind of, rein salaries in a little bit. And if you do decide to go over it, at least some of that money is going to go back to the teams that don't exceed the luxury tax threshold. Now, if you're just playing in an NBA2K MyLeague file and not in a MyGM file, the luxury tax doesn't even matter really, because you don't have any financials that you're worried about. You're not worried about making a profit. You're not worried about what the owner thinks. So I'm pretty sure in a MyLeague file, if you're paying luxury tax, it doesn't really matter. So you don't have to worry about luxury tax as much in a normal MyLeague file. But if you were in a MyGM file, where there is a business tab within the MyGM, and you got to account to the owner for profits, well then the luxury tax is going to come into play more so than it would in a MyLeague file. So MyLeague in general, you don't have to worry about paying, even though your team might be paying luxury tax, it's more important in the MyGM file. Okay, so now we know what the salary cap is, and we know what the luxury tax is all about. So then what you want to do is look at your specific team and kind of identify what the status of your team is in relation to the salary cap and the luxury tax, and start making decisions on how you want to handle player contracts. Alright, so for my Hoosier Hobgoblins in my fictional MyLeague series, total team salary for the 18-19 season is $122.17 million. And we already said a minute ago that the salary cap was $101.87 million. So you can see that I'm over the cap by $20.3 million, and that's why it's negative. So if it was a positive number, then I'd have room to add player salaries, but since I'm over the salary cap by $20.3 million, that's why it's negative. And if I wanted to add a player to the roster, I couldn't do it unless it was one of the exceptions to the salary cap rules. Now the salary cap changes every year, and then obviously they sign new collective bargaining agreements, I think it's 5 years or so. And so the salary cap isn't constant. So if I go to the 19 and 20 season, the salary cap is different. And how I figure out the salary cap, because I can't do it from the screen I was on a minute ago, it only tells me the current year's salary cap. I can figure out the salary cap by adding my team salary total to the salary cap room, and that's that 91.80 and the 11.32. So that ends up being $103.12 million. That's the salary cap for that season. Now, if I was over the cap, then the salary cap room number would be negative, and I would subtract that to determine the actual salary cap. So the salary cap went up almost a couple $1,000,000, and then 2021 season, if I add the team salary total to the salary cap room, based on the contracts that are out there in the future, like this one here that's $27.5 million, you know, I already have team salary total already obligated, so I have 71.97 in salary cap room. But those two numbers added together for that season means the cap is 104.37. In the 21-22 season, it's $105.62 million. And in the last season, when I don't have any team salary total out there, then the salary cap is $106.87 million because I don't have any salary that is actually under contract yet. Now, the luxury tax room is a little bit more complicated after the first season here. So in the current season, it says I have luxury tax room of $1.56 million. That means that if I could go over the cap because of one of the exceptions, I could only do so $1.56 million more before I'd have to pay a tax to do so. That doesn't give me a lot of room to work with. And that ends up being that 122.17 and added to the 1.56 million, because the luxury tax threshold was $123.93 million. So it doesn't add up quite right, but it gives you some idea of how much room you have. Now in the 1920 season, you see I got $3.08 million of luxury tax room. The 20 and 21 season, 4.6, 6.11 million in luxury tax room in 21-22. And in 22-23, you see I got 7.63 million in luxury tax room, which if you add the salary cap room and the luxury tax room together, that ends up being 114 million, which is under the current luxury tax threshold number. So that doesn't seem to add up to me. So I don't believe the luxury tax room number is entirely accurate, or it could vary by team based on the collective bargaining agreement. I really couldn't figure out how to figure out the luxury tax room situation. And again, if you're in a MyLeague file, it won't even really matter. The only thing that'll matter are exceptions to the cap. It matter more so in a MyGM. Now, over to the right here, you'll see that there's a blue dot with team, a green dot with player, a purple dot with cap hold, a red dot with dead cap, and a yellow dot with trade EX, which is trade exception. So what these mean, if you look down here in the bottom panel, you'll see, for example, that there is a blue number, a little harder to see there, for Justice. It says $10.25 million, and that is in blue. Well, notice that the year before it says $9.51 million. That's how much he is definitely going to be paid in the 18-19 season. But when it comes to the 19-20 season, his contract hasn't been decided, but he has what's called a team option. So a team option means that I can decide as the team that, you know, I'm going to give you a $10.25 million contract if you want it. And it's up to me. I already have the right to do that if I want. So if I looked at Justice and I thought he was a really good value at $10.25 million and I had an option to sign him, I already know the number I'm going to sign him at, which is great. So a team option, it gives you more flexibility as a team owner because you can decide whether you want to spend that salary in the next year. Now, player option, as you can see here, you know, like Jukic, Warwick, and Jedovic all have player options, which means if they wanted to take that option, they can do that. Even if I didn't want to pay it, I've already decided that it's going to be a contract that I want to do. That means when Warwick gets done with his 19-20 season and he doesn't feel like he can go out and get $19.31 million or more from somebody else, let's say that his value is only about $10 million, he can come back to my team, and I got to basically pay him $19.31 million. And because we've already agreed that we will do that as a team. So as an owner of your team, it makes more sense to negotiate team options than it does player options, because that gives you a lot more flexibility to work within the salary cap and stay under the luxury tax and those numbers that you've got to deal with. Now the next option is a cap hold. That would be listed in purple down in the salary cap table, but you can see right now I don't have any purple contract numbers that say cap hold. And cap holds come into play in the off season, when you're negotiating contracts and free agency. And so during the off season, you're going to see a cap hold. And what would actually happen is up there where it says team salary total $122.17 million, in parentheses there'd actually be the amount for cap hold, and this is so you don't spend more than the salary cap for whatever offers you have out there. The red dot stands for dead cap. So you can see down here in this particular file I'm working in, I got Al Jefferson $4 million in red, Monte Ellis $2.25 million in red. That means for the 18-19 season that I'm paying these guys that much money, and it counts against my cap space because it's money that's been set aside to do that. You can see here that this is from a file that Indiana Pacers, because this was their original team, are paying Monte Ellis $2.25 million through the 21-22 season because of the contract, because they let him go because they didn't want to keep him on the team. But based on the collective bargaining agreement, it still counts against the cap. I think they were probably able to spread that out over several seasons. And so in any case, before I do anything in these seasons, that money counts against my cap and reduces what I can spend. Now the last dot is a yellow dot for trade exceptions. And so you can see here, we're looking down my list of contracts, and I don't have any contract numbers in yellow. But if I had traded away, let's say, Jukic's salary here of $25.47 million, and I took $10 million of contract from another player for this particular season, I'd have a trade exception of the difference of $15.47 million that I could use to basically work with to sign another player to my roster and get around the salary cap, because I've already done that with an exception to the cap. So you got to retain that exception if you take less salary back for a player that you traded away, and that'll show up in your salary cap table if you do that in the file. So now that we know in general kind of what we're working with as far as the restrictions on salary and what we can do with players, well, then it's time to kind of look at your situation and go, what's going on here with my player contracts, and what kind of flexibility do I have, and what do I need to start thinking about planning for? And that's what I've got to figure out with my Hoosier Hobgoblins in our file here. So you can, when I look at this is just some thoughts I have, and then I have to figure out what I want to do. So in the comments, if you're watching this and it's, the time that I'm making these decisions, which is close to when I uploaded it, if you want to give me any suggestions, I'm open to hearing them. But, I look at the roster here and I see, first of all, as far as player options, I got 1, 2, 3 player options, 4 player options, 5, 6, 7 player, 8 player options. So that tells me right away that I don't have as much flexibility because, all these players can decide they want those contracts. So I'm going to have to figure out what to do about that. The next thing I was looking at was Jukic here, who's 30. He's under the next 4 seasons under contract, and he's got the largest contract on my team. And when he gets done with his contract, if he's not worth anything, he can decide, hey, I want that $30 million, and we'll have to decide what to do about that. Now, I'm assuming we can maybe trade Jukic away and try and take less years from somebody, or try and get a more attractive contract. So that's something that's on the table, because that's a lot of money. And you know, I look at my best player, who is Byron Dantley, and his contract expires this year, and he's getting paid $10.5 million, even though he's a much better player than Jukic. And I've got to sign him next year. And if I look at next season, I only have $11.32 million of cap space, and I'm assuming that Dantley's going to want more money than that if I'm paying Jukic $25.5 million next year. So I can see next year it's going to be kind of difficult. You know, it looks like it might be a challenge to sign Dantley. So I do have some team options. There's one team option that I've got. And so I can decide, you know, not to sign Justice next year if I don't want to. And so the next thing I kind of thought about was, you know, which players do I not want to sign next year, or can I think about trading in this particular season? And, you know, guys that don't really, I guess they're kind of expendable, are guys like Justice, or guys like even Cummings. You know, he's not under contract next year, so that's good. Garnett, Berzin's definitely, you know, he's not a very good player, but he does have a player option. So I got to figure out what to do with Berzin's. Rivera, he's undersized. We're not paying him a whole lot of money. Kidd, I like Kidd. He's pretty good value. Taylor, you know, I could probably do better with Taylor. I like Holmes off the bench right now. And obviously I got to pay Monte Ellis $2.25 million next year. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at the contract, with the number one thing being that I've got to figure out what I'm going to do with Dantley, and is there anything I can do to get some contract relief for some of these higher salaries with the player options. So I guess one of the things I'm going to look at doing is maybe some possible trades. What happens when you release guys? You know, if I release Jukic, I don't think the NBA contract rules that allow you to spread out the salary actually work properly, but I don't know that yet. So if you know that, let me know in the comments, and you know, let me know what you would do in my situation. So I think that's a pretty good overview of the salary cap table, the salary cap rules, the luxury tax rules, and kind of the trade the exceptions to the cap, and kind of what to look for in your salary cap table. And so, you know, going forward, I'm going to start thinking about what I want to do, and you know, how we can structure the team, you know, in the future years. All right, so I hope that helps you understand how the salary cap table works. You got any questions, put them in the comments below. And any feedback too. Love to hear from you guys. I know people are watching the videos, but you know, it'd be great to see some comments about what you think is going on in the league. All right, I'm Coach 2K, and I'll see you on the court in the next video. Thanks for watching.